Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Market Performance and Planning Forum, Q3. My name is Brenda Marquez on behalf of the California ISO. We welcome you to today's forum. Today's forum, we will have a few topics, but before we get started, a few key reminders is that this quarterly forum is in order to engage stakeholders and review market performance issues in a high-level dialogue on release planning, implementation, and new market enhancements. This is intended to foster open dialogue and sharing ideas and perspectives. During this call, as a reminder, it is recorded for informational and communicative purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. We will target to have this recording posted within the next 2 to 3 business days, so you'll see that on the Market Performance and Planning Forum page. During this meeting, it's structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, so we encourage both comments to be professional and respectful. We also encourage comments to not be repeated for something that was already said, and also manage our time effectively with our questions. We could also do offline questions as well if needed. During the call, our presenters will pause for questions, so be on a lookout to listen into when those natural pauses will occur for the slides. To ask a question during this meeting, we encourage them to be submitted through the raise hand icon using in the middle of the screen. You'll be added to the queue. At the time that you're added to the raise hand queue, you'll be asked to state your full name and affiliation before stating a comment. We'll be also monitoring those folks that are just dialed in audio only. That will be a separate line as well, and you'll be allowed to be entered through the *3 in this meeting. As well, if you do experience any technical issues, my event producer is Tegan, and myself will be monitoring questions in the chat as well. We also want to give a reminder that we do have the Inteller Transparency View available on the right hand of your screen. There you'll have to click refresh periodically if you want to see the most up-to-date list for our attendees for this call. As an overview of our Market Performance and Planning Forum, we are also structuring it in a different way where it's to enable dialogue and implementation planning and market performance issues. We are sharing updates for 2025 as well up to 2026 release plans as well within this information. We also have a focus on clarifying timelines, discuss external impacts, as well have policy discussions within the stakeholder initiative process. So we do have a few items to discuss today in our agenda. For today's agenda, we will have Guillermo's team with Market Performance and Advanced Analytics. They have about 10 topics they'll be planning to cover for their meeting. We will also have short-term forecasting that'll be covering their topics from the summer readiness as well. And then for around noon, if we do end up around noon, policy team will be back to start their policy update on their initiatives that they're planning. And we do have a lot of folks for the policy team here who will be providing their updates for their individual slides. At this time, we do not have a release update at this time. That next meeting will be tentatively scheduled on the 14th of October. But if you do have a question in regards to release, we will definitely route those questions to them as well. And then I do want to go ahead. There's a lot of people that will be coming from the ISO. At the time for all the ISO folks, please be sure to introduce yourself and your titles. That way our folks are able to listen in. And then let me go ahead and pass it to Guillermo, who's in the room with Abhishek as well. I do see them right there. I just doing a quick audio check as well.
Thank you, Brenda. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect, and thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the time this morning to go over the market performance update that we have for the third quarter of 2025. And if we can move to the next slide, Brenda. We have some hot topics to cover in addition to the standard metrics that we have arranged in the appendix. Now, before we go into the matter of the discussion, I would like to spend a couple of minutes to give you some context, because you may see a slightly different structure of the material. We continue to have the standard 3 areas of the performance and planning, consisting of the market update, the policy update, and the implementation update. That still is in place. We have done some changes to the structure of the first part, that is the market performance. And some feedback that we have gotten is that there is a lot of material. And yes, you go and see the deck, and we have over 100 slides, right? So it's difficult to grasp in a bigger picture level what the message is. So we're trying to do a better job to accommodate the different needs from different types of audiences. We have audience that are pretty much into the nuances and details of what's going on in the market. We still want to meet that need for them to go into detailed analytics of what's happening in the market. And that is the reason we have all this detailed analysis composing more than 100 slides. At the same time, there may be needs to have more generic and holistic views of what's going on. And because of that, we have made some changes to each section. Generally, you are going to see that for each section that is composing the market performance update, we are going to have a type of summary up front in the subsection. And in addition to that, we are adding some type of executive summary at the very beginning of the whole section. Hopefully that can give you some quick key messages of how things are going on if you don't want to spend 2 hours going through the nuances of every single slide of the deck. Hopefully with that we can cover the two bookends of the complex issues that we want to convey to you and target the different level of audiences that we may have participating in the call, or even after you want to check that by yourself, you can have that key aggregated messages at the front. If you are not interested in those little details of the slides, the executive summary may be all what you need to check. But for those that are more interested into the details, then we are happy here to discuss in more depth every single item that we have covered in this deck. As usual, you have here the agenda that we have prepared for this session. We have 11 topics plus the section of the general metrics. There is also a small change that you may notice. The general metrics that are typically just the standard metrics that we update session after session, they have been moved to the very end of the deck. It's really an appendix, and it is mainly for your own reference to track on your own. We don't go into discussing any of these metrics. If there is any question you may have about these metrics, we may be able to take it during the call. Now, what we are going to discuss is the remaining 11 topics that you have here in the agenda. Starting with executive summary, we have some assessment to convey to you regarding the overall performance of the market, the system through the summer conditions. You may have noticed that for this year, unlike the last 3-4 years, we did not produce the monthly summer report, given the changing of conditions, given the priority that we are getting for implementing new features in the market. We devoted our limited time to these other items. And this summary of the summer performance is just the overall collection of the months of June through most likely September or August, depending on what metric you are looking at, to give you a bigger picture of overall how the summer performance worked for the CAISO system. Then we're going to have another update regarding the enhancement that we implemented for the storage. That was an early June enhancement that we implemented for the accounting of FRP capacity in the logic of the state of charge for the storage resources. We are going to move then into an enhancement that we discussed last time. We have a revised proposal that we want to socialize with the market community. We have then other topics that are more standard but interesting to see how they are performing after we pass the summer, including the activity of the load conformance across the markets, day ahead, real time, including HASP, the trends and the patterns of prices, and not only for the CAISO markets, but also the bilateral prices, the gas prices, and the overall wholesale cost. We have a couple of slides regarding the congestion and the congestion revenue rights. We are going to start beefing up that section as we progress and get closer to the implementation of the EDAM. We have some socialization of a set of reports that we have historically produced. And you may recall that a few months ago, we filed at FERC a request to stop filing certain reports. The idea of giving you this information here is to give you the portfolio of what information is out there for you to be able to see different areas of market performance, including operator actions that were originally fulfilled with those reports. Then we're going to explaining one market issue that we have to report. This is more in the area of transparency. We also have one reference material to point to you for additional information that has been posted regarding the assessment of the imbalance reserve requirements for the CAISO area. This is an effort that took place early in the year, around February, and the material has been expanded to provide more details for the CAISO area. And then the last topic is some socialization of enhanced metrics to track shorter forecasting. And after that, hopefully we are on a schedule, and then we can move to a break and then pass it to policy and project implementation. That's the plan for this morning. And hopefully you find this information useful and timely for the topics that we are assessing in the market. And we always welcome any feedback you may have in terms of the scope of the content and the depth of the information that we are providing. With that, Brenda, let's move to the next slide, please. One more. Okay, let me start with the executive summary. We have three sections for the executive summary. The first one is regarding specifically the performance of the market and the system during the summer conditions. Well, you may have noticed when you look at your temperature, how sunny is out there, that unlike recent years, 2025 was a relatively moderate summer. We didn't have very extreme temperatures or any extreme event that could put us in a tight situation like what we experienced in previous years. And the manifestation of that is obviously in the demand. We have a peak under 45,000 megawatts when we have resource adequacy capacity in the range of 60,000 megawatts. That just gives you a sense of how well we were positioned for capacity. If you compare the 44,000 megawatts of peak for 2025 versus the record peak that is about 52,000 megawatts, that gives you a sense of how moderate these summer conditions were. And tracking with those conditions, you are going to see that the prices were still moderate. We see prices continue to increase as we get deeper into the summer, but overall, prices across the footprint, including the CAISO area and every other energy balance market area, prices were relatively moderate. Prices tend to spike or go higher during the evening peak around the net load, still relatively modest. When it comes to capacity, as I indicated, we have plenty of resource adequacy capacity to meet the CAISO obligation, and that also allows us to be able to support demand for exports. This is an area that historically was of interest to assess, given the competition that may happen between internal supply to meet internal demand and export needs. As you will see through the different trends, there were occasions where CAISO was able to support over 9,000 megawatts of export, given the fact that we have a sufficient supply in the system. And overall, with modest demand, relatively moderate prices, you are going to get a modest wholesale cost. So we're in fact to have a very low, relatively speaking, wholesale cost for this summer and for the whole year. Relatively to congestion of previous years, you are going to see that the trend of congestion is kind of not that different, very typical to the previous two summers, and that is just still an area of interest, how that plays relative to the congestion revenue rates that we will discuss more later on. Next slide, please. We have a series of enhancements and changes that we have or we plan to implement, and that will help us to improve the market efficiency. One of those is the process change that we have implemented over time regarding the load conformance, more specifically to the conformance applied to the day-ahead market, to the ROC process. We have some metrics to show you how that has been working and how that worked for the summer. And relatively speaking, that has come with a relatively modest cost in terms of BCR, bit cost recovery for the ROC process. We also have this enhancement of the storage resources, how they account for the impact of flexible ramping product awards when they are going to be ready to deploy any ramping capacity if there is uncertainty realized. We have been providing this update for the last 2 meetings in addition to the last storage initiative, and it's a matter of the transparency to tell you exactly how this feature has been working. Overall, given the fact that this summer was not that tight, this feature didn't have evident impact on the performance of the market. The main concern when we implemented and we started tracking this issue was under the condition that we have very tight supply conditions, and now it would make a difference whether we position resources properly to provide ramping capacity. Given the fact that we didn't have such a tight situations, this was not evident with enhancement how of a difference this could make. And we will continue to inform the market how this is working. Most likely, the most natural period of time when this could become more relevant is going to be around the shoulder months of the spring, when we start having these interesting patterns of demand, where we have relatively high peaks in the morning, in some cases up to the same level of the evening peak. That is when we start seeing some ramping tightness, and this feature may be more evident how it's performing. We also want to socialize a variation of enhancement that we're exploring to implement regarding the management of market disruptions. In the last MPPF, we provided the problem statement, what the issue is that we wanted to improve, and we came with a proposal. We have tuned and improved that proposal, and we want to socialize that today before we start the process of the business practice manual change. The last piece is that we have also tracked the performance of the Assisted Energy Transfer program, and typical to summer conditions, we have seen that up to 10 different balancing areas, including the CAISO, opted in to use this program during the summer months. And as you may know, this program is scheduled to expire, well, actually there is a typo there. This program is scheduled to expire by the end of 2025, and we have filed an extension to keep using the program as is beyond the end of this year. Next slide then, Brenda. We also are providing you some information regarding transparency efforts, and that helps us to maintain the credibility of the CAISO markets and give you the information that you need to make decisions. And one of those is giving you a reference of what current reports are out there for you to check either the market performance or more specifically operator actions such as exceptional dispatches, load conformance. And this is to close the gap that some participants may perceive exists after we stop filing certain reports at FERC. We are giving you this reference for you to know that there are certain reports out there that contain all the information that usually are related to the performance and the operator actions. We are also providing you some reference of additional analysis that has been posted to the website of the imbalance reserve requirement. This is an effort to start assessing the level of imbalance reserve requirements that may come with the implementation of the day-ahead market enhancement that utilizes a new market product, imbalance reserves. And in late last year and early this year, somewhere in February, there was a dedicated stakeholder effort to socialize how the estimation would be producing imbalance reserve requirements not only for the CAISO, but also for other future EDAM entities. The link that you're going to find in this section is simply pointing to that reference material with additional information that has been made available. The other area that we have improved the reporting is regarding the forecast metrics. There is a section at the end of the appendix where you're going to see expanded set of metrics for tracking the forecast accuracy across the load forecast, the solar, the wind, and the imbalance reserves. And lastly, we have, for transparency purposes, one section where we are indicating one market issue that we identify through our control processes that we have in the CAISO regarding the utilization of the wrong sample for estimating the flexible ramping product that impacted the period of somewhere mid-August 2024 through mid-March 2025. And there is some information for you to be provided through the discussion later today. That covers the executive summary. So let me pause and see if we have any questions. As granted, this is just the preview. We are going to start now going into more depth for each of the topics. Brenda, can we see if we have any comments, questions?
Let me take a moment for those folks. I do see Callie Wells. Let's go ahead and unmute her. And then if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Kelly, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Hey, real quick question on when you guys go through the enhancements to the state of charge with FRU, are you guys going to be talking about the FRU prices? I know some analysis was presented earlier this week in the storage meeting, so I wasn't sure if you guys are going to be presenting kind of the same findings here and having that discussion as well.
Yes, we are going to cover that part, Kelly.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I don't see any other questions on right now for you, Guillermo. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on then. Then let's start going section by section. Next slide, please. One more. Okay, what do we have for the summer conditions? As previewing the executive summary is some modest level of demand that we experienced in the summer. We peaked around August 21st, and our peak was just below 45,000 megawatts. Relatively speaking, that is a mid-level of peak for any year. And when you see that relative to the resource adequacy capacity that was shown for the summer, we have very healthy headroom. If we were peaking around 44,000 and we have resource adequacy capacity in the range of 60,000 megawatts, that delta of about 15,000 megawatts is just the margin that we have to secure the balancing of the system when we have tight supply conditions. So this is good news. That also shows the improvement that the system has gone through in the last 2-3 years after the tightness that we experienced as early as back in 2022, and not to say about the reference of 2020. And the prices, as you will see, relatively modest. I think the highest price that we saw on average was around $70, and that was during the peak time, around the net load time when we observed the most tightness condition of the system that happens to be during the net load time. The other condition, as I indicated, given the healthy margin that we have of supply available, and given the demand that we have through export bids into the CAISO market, it's not usual to see large volumes of exports being supported through the clearing process of the market. As you will see, there are some days where we easily supported more than 9,000 megawatts of exports to other balancing areas. And in some days, indeed, the level of exports was higher than the level of imports, and that meant that the CAISO became a net exporter. Given the conditions, that is just the dynamics of the interconnected system where we leverage on the diversity of the supply across the different balancing areas. And there was plenty of supply to be able to manage this type of dynamics. Next slide, please. When you look at the breakdown, one of the interesting parts you are going to see is that the majority of the exports that were coming through the system were coming through the day-ahead market, then eventually they were self-scaled into the real-time market. That means they came as day-ahead priority, and most likely they are going to be respected. There were a few instances where we have some level of export reductions. I think the maximum we observed for the month was up to 700 megawatts in a specific hour. Relative to the 9,000 megawatts already cleared, that's a relatively small percentage. And these reductions sometimes are related to congestion because they are impactful to management of congestion. So in some cases, it may not be just because we are tight in supply. In other cases, it's related to supply, but not because we don't have the supply. It's more about the ramping needs during the time of the day. Some of the reductions that we see, for instance, were actually past the peak hour when we are decking quite rapidly, and there may be temporal limitations of how much ramping we can support through that ramp down period. The other piece is that we have the assistant energy transfer. It has been used quite consistently throughout the months of the summer, and when you look at the cost, for those opting in for the program and then being subject to some type of failure of the resource efficiency evaluation, then there could be the need to have these additional transfers, which are priced typically at the price cap. Even though the participation of opting in was quite frequently available in the market, there were not many instances where the failures required actually to trigger the chargers. So when you look at the cost of the program, this was relatively cheap summer condition because the maximum cost that we saw through the summer didn't exceed the $60,000 in a day. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's go more into depth for each of the areas that we just discussed. This gives you a reference of historically how our peak demand and in overall context the demand patterns have been over the last 13 years or so. We have information back to 2012 all the way through the summer of 2025. For simplicity, we just include the 3 critical months of the summer, July through September. And this is just a typical distribution plot that tells you how frequently a specific level of demand was observed through the month. We just take every single sample of the demand through the month and we just get the distribution based on the demand level. The more you move to the right-hand side, the more red you're going to see the shade, indicating that the higher the level of the demand is. As a reference, you may locate in this plot that the tail of the distribution for September 2022 is our historical record peak. You can see that that tail exceeded the 50,000 megawatts. It was about 52,000 megawatts. And if you put in context now the tail of the August for 2025, you can see that we're just in the middle, right, around 44,500 megawatts of peak. That is how dramatically lower the peak condition for this year is, and it's not just the peak, it's overall the load conditions for the whole summer. The shapes of the distribution also tell you some interesting information just to see how concentrated the high loads were. When you have these very long right tails, it tells you that you have very few instances where you have these high loads, right? The fatter the distribution you have in a range, it means you have just more typical samples in that demand level. And it's not unusual to see that the minimum load of levels don't change as dramatically as the peak levels. it seems that we have this natural floor of how low the demand can go. As we have more integration of technologies or behind-the-meter resources, we may start to see that minimum load continues to get lower and lower. But at least for the summer, you can see that stays within a very tight range. Next slide. We also have the same tracking for the overall West, and I guess you can have different perspectives. We can use the demand for the footprint of the overall West WEC area, or the RC footprint, or the EIM footprint. We have all those variations. Here is just one of those, and this is the overall Western interconnection demand. We were below the historical peak that we observed, I don't know, last year indeed. And we were peaking at 163,000 when the historical peak has been around close to 168 gigawatts. Shape-wise, is not that different to the CAISO footprint, given the relatively impactful reference of what the desert Southwest and California area has on the overall Western interconnection. And you can see that in general, the overall interconnection demand is within a tighter range, anywhere between 90,000 to 160,000 megawatts. Next slide, please. Okay, now when we move to the comparison of what the demand was versus what capacity we have available, our reference is the resource adequacy. That is the shown capacity that we can count on that has been secured through the resource adequacy program. The first plot on the top right gives you the reference of the peak load relative to the monthly CEC forecast that was used to determine the resource adequacy provision. And you can see that in general, we have plenty of room to meet the load obligation. Now, the lower plot on the right-hand side compares indeed the monthly array showings that we have in the system versus the actual load obligation that is composed by both the peak demand plus the operating reserve. And the same thing, you can see that we have plenty of room available to meet the load obligation for the summer conditions. Next slide. When you compare this versus previous year, overall, the idea here is that we did see more resource adequacy capacity relative to the summer of the 2024 across the 3 months of the summer, to the point that July experienced the highest level of array shown, reaching the 60,000 megawatt mark. And that is significantly higher than the array showing that we have for the same month of the previous year, that was just above the $50,000 megawatt mark. Next slide. Well, we know that we have more resource adequacy. How the composition of that resource adequacy was related to the different technologies supporting the capacity. On the lower right side, you have the relative delta of the resources that were providing more or less resource adequacy capacity. And notably, you are going to see that we have additional resource adequacy coming mainly from storage resources, batteries, solar, and wind. We have some marginal reductions of resource adequacy capacity coming from gas resources and import resources. Next slide, please. This is a busy plot, but it's trying to capture the daily profile of the comparison of two sides. One is the demand side, referenced with the lines, either the purple line that accounts for the load forecast plus the operating reserves, and the dotted line that is most of the time overlapping and slightly higher than the previous one, because that includes also the self-schedules. In those cases, we're expecting that generally we're going to be able to support the self-schedules, those that are indeed high priority are with the same priority as the CAISO demand, so we can account that that is also additional load obligation that we have to account for in the overall accounting of supply versus demand. And the shaded areas in blue and green stand for the resource adequacy in blue, and above RA, that is in green. As you can see, we were with plenty of headroom overall to meet our load obligation, including the self-schedules of high priority. Next slide, please. Prices. This is just the manifestation of the overall system conditions. There are two facets to this pattern. One is on a daily basis, just to give you a sense of time-wise when we were experiencing the highest prices. Naturally, the prices tend to go up as we get deeper into the summer. The prices that were the highest were observed during the second half of August, because that happens to be the time when we actually peak, not only for the CAISO, but also across the EIN market footprint. Naturally, we have more upward pressure on the bid stack, and that is going to tend to raise the prices that the market is clearing. So not surprising that the highest prices observed happen to be around the time when we also peak demand-wise. The second facet is on an hourly profile. At what time of the day we start to see certain price excursions? Well, you are going to see that this profile that you have here is pretty typical to the duck curve, where we have the minimum prices observed in the middle of the day when we have potentially the conditions of the most supply available, potentially excess supply in the middle of the day due to the solar. And as we go from that lowest point to the evening ramping periods up to the peak, that is when we actually observe the highest price that happens to be around the net load. On average, the prices were just over $60 per megawatt hour. The highest were observed in the month of August. And in this case, the highest prices actually happen to be in the day-ahead market. Real-time prices happen to be slightly lower. Next slide, please. This is another reference for the prices, but across the market footprint of the real-time market, including all the areas of the energy imbalance market. For simplicity, to not have 23 different lines overlapping one on top of the other, we have done some type of aggregation. Here we are only providing the pattern of the prices organized by regions. The regions are just a construct for illustration. They are not actually something in the market. We are just gathering and getting the average prices for all the balancing areas of the EIN market that are within the California footprint. We also have the areas that make up the Pacific Northwest to be aggregated in one single trend, and so on. We also have the Southwest, the Desert Southwest, and the Central Mountain. Just to give you some sense, regional wise, how the prices trended. Overall, you're going to see that the prices follow kind of similar trends across the different areas of regions of the system, with CAISO prices trending up and relative to other regions of the EIN market. Next slide, please. Outages. This is an area that has also been of interest when we were dealing with very tight supply situations in previous summers. We keep tracking this metric, and as you can see, it's within the typical range, I would say, to have this level of outages related to resource adequacy capacity. Nothing surprising. It's still a moderate condition that we were dealing in the summer. Having that much headroom and the interplay with outages really have a little effect. Next slide, please. Exports. This plot gets a little bit busy, but trying to capture the essence of the dynamics here. We have the flexibility to allow participation of export resources in our market. There are different types of exports, different types of priorities that are enabling the market. We have those exports related to existing transmission rights and transmission rights that are basically as given, fixed. We also have the other bookend where we allow the economic participation. Any export can come with a price quantity and be subject to the clearing process. And in between, we have a set of different type of priorities for participation of exports, going from the highest priority, that is the day-ahead high priority, DAM_PT, to the lowest priority, that would be real-time low priority, LPT. The dominant color you're going to see in this trend over the 3-month period is basically the flat line of the existing rights, the green, ETCs, TORs, they are just given, granted. And then the dynamics really happen mainly from the day-ahead low priority exports. These are exports that are coming directly into the day-ahead market, and they are just willing to take any price. They are price taker, and they self-schedule with the lowest priority. And they are making up most of the volumes that we observe for the summer for exports. When you look at the range of the y-axis, you can see that in some cases we easily exceed the 9,000 megawatts, even after you discount the fixed portion of the existing transmission rights. The portion in yellow is really all the exports that were dynamically cleared in the day-ahead market, that they were just coming through the door of the market trying to secure supply. And most of the time, they were fully awarded, given the ability that we have for meeting that obligation of our load plus additional headroom to support exports. Next slide, please. This is another busy plot, gives you the reference of how much imports equivalent to supply and how much exports we have equivalent to demand, and the net balance. The net balance is what we call the net interchange. It's just the algebraic difference between the imports and the exports. Anytime that yellow line that accounts for the net interchange is positive, that means the CAISO area is a net importer. Every time that bright yellow line goes negative, it means CAISO area position is of a net exporter. And you will see that there are many days through the summer, somewhere in early June, end of July, and in the middle of August, where CAISO area was a net exporter. In some cases, reaching close to 3,000 megawatts of net positions. Next slide, please. Wheel-through transactions. This is another area that historically has been of interest for the summer performance. As you may recall, there was a long debate on how to allow to model to clear this type of transactions in the CAISO market. A wheel-through transaction is simply a transaction that is injected at some location somewhere in the CAISO system and is modeled with a withdrawal in another location. It's just passing through the system. It doesn't add supply or demand, but it accounts or it may compete for limited transmission capacity in the CAISO system. There is a process where those that have the merit to request can come before the market runs in advance and secure the high priority nomination for the wheel-through transactions, just going through our process. Once they secure that nomination of high priority, they can use that through the day-ahead real-time participation, and the market is going to treat them just with the highest priority, that is the export, the wheel-through high priority. And what you have seen here is that on one end, on the table on the left, we have the registration. These are how many, for what paths, we got high priority wheel-through transactions registered in advance. And on the lower right, what you have is the actual submission of bids in the market and how much they actually clear. So just to put an example, let's say, for instance, the only usage of these high priority wheels was somewhere in the second half of, actually through the month of July. That is the yellow bars. And that on the y-axis is no more than 75 megawatts. When you compare that against how actually they secure and register in advance for utilization. In the month of July, we have that there was up to 340 megawatts registered. So they were using no more than 75, I don't know, it's like 20% or so of the high priority wheels that were registered and eventually used in the market. That is quite a contrasting picture when you look at historical summers. In 2023, for instance, we have almost 2,000 megawatts of high priority wheels registered in the system, and in some cases, 70–80% of those wheel-through transactions were actually used, bid, cleared in the market. So this is just another angle of how moderate the conditions were in the summer, such that even the wheel-through transactions were not in such a high demand. Next slide, please. How many reductions we had to apply to the different type of exports? This is a balancing act of trying to meet CAISO load obligation, all the exports, ensuring that they can flow through the transmission system and they can handle any temporal ramping constraints. And we do that through both the ROC process and the hourly scheduling process in the real time. What you have here is just the full list of the days indicating the maximum reduction of exports that we have in either the ROC or the HASP market. And the highest value that you're going to see happened to be around August 24 for 740 megawatts. That is the amount of exports that were cleared in the integrated forward market and could not be accommodated in the ROC process. That was a reduction. That doesn't mean that these exports eventually cannot flow. It simply means that they may have to go into the real time and rebid to see if they can successfully clear. And for those days, as you may see in HASP, we actually didn't have any reductions. Next slide, please. Moving on to the cost. We have been keeping track of the wholesale cost. It's an interesting metric that captures the whole essence of the market and system conditions because it's just pricing the demand at the clearing prices that we have. And on the left-hand side, you have the breakdown on a daily basis for the wholesale cost for the CAISO area over the summer months. And you can see we spike in the cost to about $54 million in one day. That was around August 22nd. I think we peak on August 21st. So it's still within the range of days where we were experiencing the highest load. Again, it's a combination of the level of demand and the prices that we pay to clear that demand. And the dotted line gives you just the average cost of the wholesale cost. It's basically wholesale cost divided by the demand or the energy implied by the demand. And on the upper right, we also have another metric that is of interest, and we typically track that as well, and it is the offset, the real-time offset, both energy and congestion. Not surprisingly, we also have those spiking towards the end of August when we also observe the highest wholesale cost. Again, this is a time when we were peaking for basically the whole year. I think we can safely say that we already peaked for the year. Next slide, please. This is another reference just to put perspective of the load conditions for the EIM footprint. That includes the same type of aggregation we have done by regions. California is just the summation of the demands for all the California balancing areas. The Pacific Northwest is the summation of the demand for all the areas in the Pacific Northwest, and so on. That just gives you a sense when they were peaking, and sometimes they are not coincidental. Overall, the EIM market was peaking also in the second half of August. Next slide. Transfers. Well, transfers are quite tricky to put a number that could comprise all the information of what happened in the summer. So instead, we give you just typical trends of the transfers across the 3 months of the summer. And transfers are inherently very dynamic because they are the byproduct of all the economics of the real-time market. They are going to change from 5 minutes to 5 minutes given all the economics that are happening across the different balancing areas of the market. Overall, you're going to see that we tended to have more of an export condition for the CAISO area than an import condition. And that typically has to do with the conditions of the middle of the day. Next slide, please. This is just the hourly profile, not that surprising. That is the similar profile that we have for the production of solar. When we have more solar is when we can afford to export more power through the transfers. Next slide, please. We have similar metrics just for your information about the other areas, the California, the Pacific Northwest, the Southwest, and I think you can look at by yourself if you want to gain any information. It's just an aggregated fashion to show you the trends of the transfers. Next slide. Another area that may be more relevant because of the Assistant Energy Transfer Program is how frequently we observe different balancing areas passing or failing the test. Specific for this summer, this shows you the percentage, how frequently different balancing areas in the EIM market failed the flexible ramping test. Overall, it's a very de minimis level of failures. You can see that the highest level of failures is less than 1%. And most of the time it's basically 0. That also is a testament how non-tight the summer conditions were, not just for the CAISO, but across the West. And I mean across the whole summer, not just for one specific day. Very low levels of flexible ramping test failures. Next one. And this is the other way around for the downward direction. Not that much different. Obviously, it's different conditions for different areas depending how much renewables they may have in the system. But overall, even the direction is in the opposite side. We have very small level of infeasibilities or failures, I would say. Next slide. And this is just the summary of the summer conditions for how frequently the different balancing areas opted in for the Assistant Energy Transfer Program. It has 2 dimensions. The first one is color-coded by squares, 1 square per day, and if there is a color, it means that entity opted in for that specific day. For instance, something that you may not appreciate from this information, but I can tell you, for CAISO area, you are going to see that consistently CAISO opted in started with July 1st. And by practice for this summer, we actually took the approach of opting in consistently the CAISO area for the whole summer months, July 1st through the end of September. And that is one dimension. The second dimension is the dots that you may see overimposed in different areas. These dots reflect instances where there was a resource efficiency failure. Effectively, the instances where the program is going to be material is going to be anytime the dot overlaps with a color square, because there was a failure and the entity secure participation in the program. That means they are allowed to rely on additional transfer even though they failed the test. These are the cases where the program is useful because they want to manage their failure and be able to rely on additional transfers provided by the market. For this summer, and this, I believe, the same metric that we have for the previous summer, is also 10 different balancing areas. I believe early in the year there was one entity that also opted in that didn't opt in for the summer. So if you look for the mutually exclusive set of entities that have participated ever in the assistant energy transfer, it would be basically these 10 balancing areas plus the bank area that opted in somewhere early in the year. Next slide. Cost. Once you have opted in, once you have a failure, and once the market clears and you have relied on additional transfers through the market, you may be exposed to a specific charge because of that participation. How expensive that participation has been? Well, this is the trend of the cost for participating in the program, and the total cost that you have in there is relatively modest. If you compare that against the cost that we experienced, I would say last year, it's significantly lower. I believe last year was over $1 million overall. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a good time to pause and see if we have any follow-ups, any questions before we move to the next topic. Brenda?
Let me see if there's any questions. I don't see any at the time. If some folks want to ask a question on the topic that Guillermo discussed, feel free to raise your hand. But seeing any, I don't see any more questions in the queue. Oh, there we go, Dan Williams. Let's go ahead and mute Dan. And please introduce yourself, Dan. Thank you.
We cannot hear you, Dan.
Hey, thanks, Guillermo. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, when it unmuted, it disconnected my headphones briefly. But a couple things. One, just feedback. I really like the kind of new format that you're using, and I think the way you've structured all of this is really helpful for stakeholders. So thank you and your team for all the effort that went into this. I did have kind of a question just on the ability to find a metric that maybe we've discussed in the past, but doesn't appear to be being reported. And that's just whether there's an ability to narrow in on some of the peak days and peak hours on which resource or resources in the IFM were likely marginal or setting the system marginal energy component during those times. It's just something I've been curious about as we've been thinking about changes in import activity, obviously impacts of storage on the system, and also just sort of behavior of virtual supply. I'm just wondering if there's anything that your team has looked at there, if that's even something that you think would be a relevant metric to go into.
Sure, thank you, Dan. And let me give you first some reference from the past. We have actually tracked that metric. I'm trying to recall myself in what effort we published that information. It was a one-time deal. It hasn't been a consistent metric that we publish through any type of report. There was an effort, I believe, when we were discussing market power mitigation and how we measure the competitiveness of the market, where we put a series of metrics of marginality of the market solution. I think that may have gone into some discussion with the Market Surveillance Committee and was part of the effort of market power mitigation. I can dust off that. Now, what I want to say is that, yes, we have tracked that once for that specific effort. I see your point. I think we can entertain the idea to see if we can consistently publish that information. We have some internal tracking for that metric. There will be potentially something that when you see the metric, you may get disappointed because by mathematical principle, you may end up having more than one marginal resource. If there is no single element congested in the system, yes, you can guarantee that there will be one marginal resource most of the time. However, as you start getting congestion in the system, effectively you are going to have n-1 marginal resources depending on the number of n constraints that you have in the system. So when we have, for instance, in the summer conditions, a couple of dozen of constraints. You may end up in a case where you have many different resources that happen to be marginal just because how they are located in the system relative to the transmission constraint. And if you get, I don't know, a dozen of resources that are marginal and you have all types of resources, batteries, wind and gas, and so on, then it raises the question, what value is giving you when it's just all over the place? So I don't know if you have any reaction to that. I think we can entertain the idea to see if we can start posting that metric. It comes with those strings attached.
Yeah, now that you mentioned the market power side, I was trying to remember if it was like from the price performance effort, and I think you're right. It was a number of years ago that we went through that. Maybe when we were first looking at some of the system market power study stuff in the early days of price formation enhancements. And yeah, totally get the fact that as you multiply out to more constraints and you have just many more things going on in the system. The question's kind of coming from just trying to understand a little bit when we're working in the price formation enhancements initiative on different ways of developing scarcity price tools. Kind of when it's getting to be tighter in latent supply, as Scott Harvey's called it, and others, kind of what resources are left there that would be the next ones that would be brought on as demand increased, and just trying to get a feel for whether in tighter days that's generally coming from import bids versus gas resources versus storage resources, and maybe there's nothing there, maybe it can't tell us anything. It was just something that came to mind and figured I'd ask about it.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. We will explore and see if next round we can show something and we can go from there to see if there is meaningful information that can be provided with that metric. Yeah, we will take it for next round.
Great. Yeah, and I suppose it's something that as we continue to work through price formation enhancements may make more sense just to look at it in that context too. But yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, Dan.
We do have one more question, Guillermo. Alan, let's go ahead and unmute Alan, and please be sure to introduce yourself. Go ahead, Alan.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Alan Meck, Alan Meck, PG&E. You might not have this data right now, and that's fine, but I just wanted to say I'd be interested in the slide you presented showing the days opted into AET and the RSE failures. It would also be interesting for me to see if you could present some data on the magnitude of the RSE failures as like expressed as like a percentage of each BA's peak load, just so we could get some idea of like how short are we, how are we doing vis-a-vis our partners. I think would be interesting.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback. I think it's a useful reference you're pointing. Yeah, we will consider that for the expansion of the metric.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
There's no more questions in queue. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm planning the room with Guillermo and Abhishek. This section is, yes, next slide, please. Next section is the an update on the enhancement FRU in SOC modeling. This enhancement is recorded in Market Operations BPM PRR 1627. This summer, back in June 3rd, we had this enhancement activated in production. The purpose was to add FRU into battery state of charge trajectory within the multi-interval optimization. This is to better account for FRU impact on state of charge. So far, it's been 3 months, a little bit over 3 months since the activation date, and the main observation we have is that the share of FRU awards from battery resources may remain stable after the launch. And we saw a modest shift in FRU awards in the morning and evening peaks, or early hours of the day and end hours of the day. Since we had moderate summer conditions, like what Guillermo already talked about, this did not create tight supply conditions. We did not see a whole lot of price signals in FRU at this point. Going forward, we will continue to monitor the enhancement performance, and we'll give periodic updates, probably through MPPF and other forums as well. Next slide, please. If you tune in on a Monday call in storage meeting, this will be the same slides as Monday. So to start with, here is the formulation. We have the SOC energy constraint, that is the first equation, and then SOC AT constraint that was introduced back in 2023 energy storage enhancement. The new changes to add this FRU term that is in red into this SOC AT equations. So that is this enhancement. Next slide, please. Excuse me. We'll start by looking into the battery sharing FRU passing group procurement in RTPD. Here is the hourly distribution 3 months before versus 3 months after activation. So we have the two subcharts on the page. X-axis is the hours of the day 1 through 24. The Y-axis is the percentage share in percentage. You can see that batteries still hold a major share in FRU procurement. The hourly percentiles, the boxes, mainly 25th to 75th percentiles, remained within like the 30, 35 to 75, 80% ranges. We did observe this slight shift, lower share in early hours and late hours of the day, and then slightly higher share in the midday hours, mainly the solar hours. Next slide, please. From the hourly perspective, hourly average perspective, here we have the hourly average procurement in RTPD broken down by resource types. That is the right upper chart, and then broken down by regions, that is the bottom chart. So from the resource composition perspective, we saw that the slightly smaller FRU volume from batteries marking at LESR in light blue in early hours and late hours of the day was mainly picked up by generic NGRs, that is in gray in the upper right chart, and water, that is in darker blue. Now looking at the region breakdown, we can see that the slightly reduction in California region in early morning and late hours of the day was picked up by Pacific Northwest, that is in yellow, and Southwest regions, that is in light blue on the chart. Next slide, please. To see how impactful these changes are on the system level, here are the couple standard metrics we track for battery performance in general. The top one is the box plot, the hourly distribution of the energy schedules in the real time. The bottom chart is the total state of charge in RTD. So we continue to see that batteries are charging during the day, discharging through the peak hours. We did see the slightly higher discharging schedules after the activation in the peak hours. And for total state of charge, we saw smaller boxes right before the peak hours, where the state of charge tend to peak on the system level around hour and 18. And both of these are marginal improvements, I would say, on the system level. But since we have the seasonality and day-to-day fluctuations, thinking back 3 months before activation, we're really looking at March. So that's the shoulder month. And now end of August. By the end of August, early September, we're looking at end of summer. So it's not really an apples-to-apples comparison at this point. We also have new resource participation during this time, so overall, we say that these trends remain steady, and we wouldn't credit these marginal improvements to the feature activation just yet. Next slide, please. Okay, so done with the volumes, here are the prices. We have data collected at the most granular resource level. Here are the FRU and FRD prices at the resource level, meaning all the resources in the passing group with a non-zero FRU or FRD award in that interval. So, excuse me, these are hourly distributions, x-axis 1 through 24, hours of the day, y-axis is by dollar. These are, the top one is FRU resource price, the bottom one is FRD resource price. From this chart, we can see that all the price signals remain minimal. We don't see a whole lot of non-zero prices showing up in the system just yet. Since we had this moderate summer conditions this past summer, we did start to see some outliers higher outliers showing up on the FRU chart. Some higher prices from mainly opportunity cost or congestion in the deployment scenario for the most part. And the highest point on the chart in hour ending 20 is about 1,500. So it was a procurement of 0.08 megawatt from this one resource at $1,700-ish, $1,700-ish price, where the transmission constraint deployment scenarios were binding with multiple contingency, and it was a small, really small procurement just for one interval in that case. For the FRU price topic, we did also observe a few cases of positive FRU awards on the resource with negative prices. This is an issue we talked about in the stakeholder meeting in storage design and model initiative, and then I have an example a couple slides later on this issue. At this point, we are still discussing possible resolutions internally. Next slide, please. So after the FRP prices, here are the regulation up and down prices at the resource level. So the top one is reg up prices. Resource level reg up prices remain non-negative and within typical ranges. The bottom one is reg down prices at the resource level in RTPD. So for the most part, prices remained non-negative and within typical ranges. We had one instance on July 6th where there was a manual procedure error, and that produced one negative reg down price in one of the CAISO subregions in that interval, and the impacted resource prices were corrected. Next slide, please. Here is the example of negative FRU price. The numbers were modified slightly from the production real numbers. The shape, the concept stays the same for with the example. These numbers were taken from one example, the largest FRU award at the highest, the most negative FRU price example. So we can see that the scale and the cause of this. We start by saying, well, we're looking at the 6th interval RTPD run, start with the first column, first hour, minute 30 to the end of second hour, minute 45. This one resource came in with day ahead, reg up and reg down self-schedules. Those are the second and third columns. These will be respected with high penalty price in the real time, so we want to respect that. That is the starting point. And this one resource coming into the market has a high initial state of charge that is already close to the max level of state of charge upper limit. So we can see that on all the way on the right, we have SOC underscore energy and SOC underscore AT. Those are the two equations we talked about at the beginning. SOC AT at the end of the case in horizon was hitting upper limit of 500 megawatt hour. This creates something that the optimization need to work out to either position energy or now, since we have FRU added, position FRU to create room so that we can respect rec down south schedule still within the SOC underscore AT conditions. And this resource came with a charging coefficient of 0.87. The resource energy bid was in the money to charge with a relatively low energy price for this market run. At the end, the story is that FRU was taking a positive megawatt in intervals 3 and 4, where FRU price was down to minus 13.4, coming from the energy opportunity cost. Let me stop here and see if we have any questions. I think we got some follow-up questions from the previous discussions.
I do have one question. Let's go ahead and mute Callie. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF, and I have to apologize. I had to hop off the storage call during this specific section on Monday, so maybe this question was already asked and answered. So are you guys seeing that this typically happens when you have one of the SOC constraints binding, and is the interplay here that's causing the negative prices similar to what we saw during Market Sim when we were looking at adding the attenuation factors all into the one constraint earlier, and then we saw the negative reg down prices. So we ended up going a different direction on those constraints. Are we seeing that a similar interplay here? Is that my understanding?
It's been a while since we had that market sim for reg down. I don't remember the exact scenario back then. Here, because there is the opportunity cost, well, because energy is in the money to charge, and FRU does not have a bid, so it's priced based on the opportunity cost. It's adding FRU to SOC AT constraint is creating this option for us to discharge a little more from FRU side and charge a little more on the energy side. There is where we're creating this opportunity cost for FRU. Does that make sense to you?
It does, yes. And then a follow-up question, so you mentioned that you guys are talking about resolutions. Are you guys going to be discussing these through the storage enhancements policy effort, or what forum should we chime in on to hear about the resolutions and ultimately what gets moved forward?
Yeah, I think, Kelly, the most natural place to have that discussion would be the stakeholder discussions. I think it's going to be a matter of the time when we have more insight to share with the community, we will do so. Whether that fits better into the timing of the next MPPF or the next stakeholder meeting, I think we need to have some flexibility to ensure that we can communicate this as quickly as feasible. But we're still internally discussing options here. But yes, the bottom line is that there will be an opportunity to socialize this externally with participants.
Okay, that sounds good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this so far?
No other questions in queue at this time. Thank you.
All right, great. Let's go to the next slide, please. So these next few slides, we moved a few MPPF regular metrics up to this section to look at some overall trend. This is the proportion of storage resource in reg up requirements within the day-ahead market. So the y-axis on the left is percentage share. We put in the reg up requirement, the mean of average at reg up requirement in green just for reference. From this chart, we can see that storage continue to hold a major share in reg up market, or actually saturated the reg up market. We're procuring a lot of times over 100% of the requirement, and we don't see significant changes over the past few months. Next slide, please. And similarly, here is the proportion of storage resource in reg down requirement within the day-ahead market. Excuse me. Storage resource continue to dominate the reg down requirements, and we don't see a significant trend shift this summer. Next slide, please. Here is the daily averages of FRU procurement in the passing group in RTPD, broken down by resource types. Resource types are listed below. So batteries, LESR, continue to hold a major share in FRU procurement in passing group procurement. We don't really see a significant shift after activation on this chart. This is the daily average. Next slide, please. And here is the hourly average of FRU procurement in a passing group, organized by month, so the past 6 months. We can't really see the trend shift just yet, maybe just a little bit. There is requirement differences, requirement fluctuations from month to month, so these averages, we can't really tell the story like we could when we saw the comparisons before versus after. Next slide, please. Okay, that is the end of this section. Any final questions?
No questions at this time.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide, and I will cover this one. We have explored an improvement to a current practice that we have. For those of you who participated in the last MPPF back in June, we socialized one first approach that we were working internally. And after getting feedback from some participants and after further assessment, we have further tuned that enhancement. And this is all about improving, automating a current practice to deal with what we call market disruptions. And the idea is that we want to make an improvement because as of now, it's a manual practice. Every time there is a market disruption, it requires our operators to take active action to mitigate for that disruption, including reaching out to the scheduling coordinator that was with the resource impacted, and then have the reporting of how that disruption happened. When you are dealing with that just in time, in the real time, well, sometimes it's not the ideal condition to be dealing with, right? And there are higher priority, more sensitive, critical issues for operators to spend their time, and having to deal with these disruptions is something that we aim at improving by mitigating the need for having these manual actions. What we want to do is first socialize this improvement with you and then proceed with a business practice manual change. We have done some assessment of being able to apply this enhancement within the current tariff provisions that we have. And this first stage is a matter of transparency and socialization of what the CAISO is planning to do. Next slide, please. With that, let me start with the basics. What are we dealing here with? Well, we have a real-time market that is running consistently every 5 minutes, every 15 minutes, every hour. Either the hourly ahead the scheduling process, the 15-minute market, or the 5-minute market. All these are automated processes that 99.99% of the time have no issues. They just run, produce a solution, and just move to the next. However, there are some outliers, some few cases where the market, which in the end is no more than a mathematical optimization running behind the scenes cannot find a solution, something that we call an infeasible condition. When that happens, the market just cannot find a solution. Now, that issue may be related to one single resource, to one single constraint of one resource out of the hundreds of resources that we have in the system. And because of that single constraint, that single resource, we cannot get a solution for every single resource in the system. And obviously, that is not ideal. What we are dealing here is a market disruption. What is going to happen is that the market cannot find a solution, then our market operator has to go find information of what resource is causing the problem, then manually go into the market application, exclude that resource from continuing to participate in the market. That resource is no longer in the market, and now resume the market run. After some time, come back to see if the issue still persists, to keep the resource out of the market, and otherwise the resource is put back. It's a type of trial and error because we don't know if the issue has been resolved 5, 10, 20 minutes later. And as part of that, we also communicate to the scaling coordinator of that resource that that resource was creating some infeasibility in the market and therefore was pulled out. And we track that information. We post that information in the monthly performance report to give you the transparency, how frequently that is happening. The plot that you have here is the trend for the real-time market. Either is the HASP market, the 15-minute market, the RTD market. And the dominant color you are going to see here is the red one. Most of the time, the market disruptions are happening in the 5-minute market. That happens to be the most critical market because that is the market where you have really no time to react to things happening. It's basically looking at the back mirror because it's too late when you realize that something has already happened. And the aim of this improvement is to try to tackle mainly the red color here, the RTD market. What are we doing? Next slide, please. Well, I think I already went ahead of myself with explaining what is the current practice. Next slide. What we have explored is an improvement to the market application logic. By the time we are solving the problem, the numerical optimization problem, we do have information of the optimization that allow us to identify if there is an infeasibility, if there is a constraint that is infeasible, if there is a resource that is creating that infeasibility. What we can do is, instead of letting the market just to fail because it's detecting that infeasibility, is to actually take that infeasibility, relax the constraint, basically relax the limit of that constraint to no longer be infeasible. If for whatever reason we are saying that a constraint limit is 100 megawatts and the infeasibility tells us that we can just manage up to 102, instead of failing the market because we cannot bring the 102 to 100, we simply relax the constraint to 102, and now the market can actually find a solution. We relax the constraint, and with that now it is feasible and we can find a solution. The issue here is that typically it's going to be related to one resource constraint. The resource that may have the infeasible constraint as part of this improvement can also get an optimal dispatch. The limitation we found in the original version that was discussed in the last MPPF was that that dispatch for that resource with the problematic constraint in some cases may be actually infeasible for the resource to follow, right? For instance, if we are relaxing, let's say, a ramping constraint, and the ramping is 5 megawatts per minute, and we're relaxing that to 7 megawatts per minute. When we send the dispatch instruction to that resource, it cannot feasibly follow that instruction. And that's a problem because we don't want to generate solutions that are infeasible for any resource even though we are talking about one single resource that already has some type of problematic setup in the market. These type of issues happen because the information coming into the real-time market is quite dynamic. We receive all the time new information. Typically, it's going to be associated with some information that came through an outage or revise of telemetry, EMS information. So the market cannot identify what the problem is and try to fix it, but we can relax and approximate the solution and be able to still produce a solution for everybody in the market. That is the main advantage. Next slide, please. So what is the modification we are proposing? The modification is that we still want to have the enhancement where we identify the problematic constraint for the problematic resource. We relax that constraint. We are able to get a solution. However, for that resource with a problematic constraint, even though we produce an optimal dispatch that might or might not be feasible, instead of sending that downstream as an instruction, as an optimal dispatch, we are going to replace that approximated optimal dispatch with the previous dispatch. The previous dispatch was a market solution that was okay, has no issues. That dispatch was feasible, and we simply ask the resource to follow that same instruction, basically stay where you are. This is indeed an existing practice that we currently have. When there are issues happening, that is an approach that we take. Basically, we indicate resources, stay where you are unless otherwise indicated. And they stay with this flat line. When we have to deal with other conditions, we may have to issue exceptional dispatches to some resources to start moving away from that dispatch, but otherwise the instruction is just stay where you are, effectively means follow your previous dispatch. This is language practice that is already in place, and we just want to leverage that to automate this enhancement. The whole idea here is to minimize the manual process and make it as automated as possible. That will allow us to get better solutions for every resource, because once we have one single resource with a problem, every resource is impacted. With this improvement, we are still allowing every other resource to get an optimal dispatch. Next slide, please. Now, that is the solution for the 5-minute market. For the 15-minute market, we have explored that, well, using the last dispatch may not always be the right solution. When we are talking about the 15-minute market, we are already talking about potentially changing of status, going from offline to online, maybe with some transitions. There may be some implications about ancillary services. So the 15-minute market in this case is actually more complicated than the 5-minute market. The proposal is that we are not expecting to touch, as of now, the 15-minute market. We want to target the 5-minute market and see eventually how much of an issue is still pending for the 15-minute market. If you recall the first pattern that we show in this section, the majority of the instances happen to be in the 5-minute market. So we are going to tackle 80% of the problem with this approach. Next slide. And we have the other market, that is the stock market. This is the commitment market in the real-time market that covers up to 4.5 hours. Here we don't have a challenge because that market is basically just to project commitments. We don't issue financially binding or operationally binding dispatches, schedules. It's just future commitments. And most of the time, those commitments are going to be reassessed in subsequent 15-minute markets. So effectively, we can implement the feature as it is. There is no need to replace with the previous dispatch because these are not binding. And this is the scope of the enhancement. We wanted to socialize this and start a business practice manual change to implement this at some point once we have the implementation of the logic in the market application. Let me pause and see if we have any feedback on this topic before we move up. Brenda, can we check if we have any questions?
Let me see, there's no questions at this time unless someone has a raised hand right now. But at this time, I don't see any questions being raised, both the audio and the speaker line. Thank you.
Okay, then we can move to the next topic.
Hi, this is Quinn again. I'll cover the short update on the load conformance. Next slide, please. So load conformance is a tool that operators have to use, they can use to modify the load requirement or the demand that market optimization queries be supplied against. So operators may use it based on the projected or observed system conditions. So we have frequent update, periodic update on this load conformance topic in MPPF. This section being one of the more standard sections now. So this summer we have in the past we have implemented a series of improvements so that in processes and market logics that may impact the use of load conformance. And this summer, there has been a controlled reduction in RUC adjustment in the day-ahead market, and we had a moderate summer, so we had moderate use of load conformance in the real-time market as well. Going forward, we will continue to assess the use of load conformance across the market, and we'll target market improvements in these areas. Next slide, please. So this is one of the slides we keep adding on to. This is RUC adjustment over the past few years, starting January 2022 through mid-September-ish 2025. The y-axis is megawatt daily average RUC conformance. So in this period, so typically we can see a higher value during tight system conditions, higher values in the summer, spikes on the peak days or heat waves. We usually see minimum to very low values in the winter or spring months. And, we've gone through some changes in processes in the past few years. We started with something we call the pilot program in 2023, and followed by an implementation of this programmatic calculation that guided the RUC adjustment second half of 2023. Followed that, the RUC adjustment came down after this enhancement to adjust the percentiles. That's early 2024. Then we saw the spikes in summer 2024, something in October 2024 and January 2025. Those are the RUC adjustment to manage the fire risks in those periods. Then March 2025, we had 500 kV outages, so that's why we had RUC adjustment in March. Then it comes to the summer 2025 values that we see this summer. Starting the starting of that is probably late, the end of May 2025. That is the first spike we saw, and through this summer. These values remain typical. Usually the spikes are tied to the high heat days. Next slide, please. So, excuse me. We monitor this bid cost recovery metric. This is broken down by market types. So for this one, we focus on the RUC allocation. This is a metric to complement the RUC adjustment one we just saw. So the idea is that by placing extra RUC adjustment, we are asking to procure up to a higher level of load requirement. And because of that, we may start up some extra long start units in the day-ahead market that becomes binding from the day-ahead to the real-time. And going into real-time, some of these commitments may not be economical given the real-time market conditions. So that we saw these RUC BCR allocation was high during the second half of 2023. That was the high percentile period. And the RUC BCR allocation has come down starting January 2024 and remained relatively low, steady until now and going through this summer. Next slide, please. Another comparison we've been looking at is these hourly profiles year over year. So we have Q1, 2, 3, 4 on the page. Each line within that subchart shows the hourly average of RUC conformance in that month. So we're comparing the January through March in the Q1, and then April through May in Q2, and so on. So we can see that this year, 2025, the values are either lower than the previous year or generally comparable. In Q4 charts, we're not in Q4 yet, so Q4 charts has 2023 versus 2024 in there. And that was the drop, a dramatic drop from 2023 to 2024 we just saw on the other charts as well. Next slide, please. So we also monitor the load conformance in the real-time market. This is specifically daily average in HASP. The period is the same January 2022 through mid-September-ish 2025. So this past summer, there is moderate uses of load conformance in the real-time market as well. We don't see a meaningful behavior shift after the FRU in SOC modeling change. That is early June timeframe, and yeah, this has been the moderate usage this year. Next slide, please. Okay, that is the end of this section. Do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions at this time, Quinn. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I can take over for gas, power prices, and market costs. This is under market analysis. Yeah, in this section, we'll cover what the market prices and costs were so far this summer, as well as what the gas and bilateral power prices were, since they're a factor in that inform the market prices and the market costs. So starting with the highlights and some context around CAISO processes. CAISO monitors these gas and power prices daily and publish data and reports to our market participants as well to ensure that these gas prices and power prices are up to date and reflected in the market. Is important because gas and power prices are used in calculation of reference levels for resources, for energy and commitment costs, which are impacting the bids and consequently market clearing prices. So far this summer, gas prices and power prices have been fairly stable. It's been very calm. Gas price volatility has also been limited, and consequently, we've seen that the wholesale electricity costs in both CAISO and EIM have also been stable and on the lower end range compared to in the previous years. CAISO is continually monitoring these prices on a daily basis and reporting them, and as we've been doing, we'll continue to report and produce and share these updates with market participants in CAISO and EIM areas. And let's go to the next slide and dive into some of the trends we've been seeing. First, let's start with the CAISO's prices, the market prices, excuse me. Market prices so far in the summer have been relatively stable, with some slight increase starting from around April across the three markets. This chart is showing the prices that are based on the system marginal energy component. We're seeing prices about $25 to $40 so far this summer. Let's go to the next slide. This is a similar chart, but it's focusing on the real-time prices. The previous chart showed IFM FMM and real-time RTD prices. This is just the real-time prices overlaid with the bilateral power prices. So the bars are showing the real-time prices by region, and the dotted lines are showing the bilateral prices at the Mid-C and Palo Verde hub. In general, there's some correlation between the market prices and the bilateral power prices. So far this summer, we've seen both being very stable. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's switch to the gas prices. This slide is showing the gas prices at PG&E and SoCal Citygate for the California market participants, and in general, it's been low and stable prices, while it's hard to see on this chart, the average for 2025 so far in the summer is slightly higher than it was in 2024. Let's go to the next slide. So similar chart, but this is showing the hubs that are in the EIM market and affect EIM entities. We're seeing a similar trend as far as comparing to 2024, where 2025 prices on average so far this summer have been slightly higher than in 2024 for the hubs shown on this chart. One notable exception is the Sumas hub, which has experienced more volatility than all of the other hubs and has also dropped off in price this year. Let's go to the next slide. And let's take a look at some futures. The gas futures this chart is showing gas futures for delivery in July, August, and September 2025, with the x-axis showing the data from the beginning of the year for delivery in those months. For the 5 hubs that are shown on the chart, there's a spike in the futures right around March 10th, which coincides with the announcement of international import tariffs. Since then, futures have dropped off significantly, and some really big declines, one at the end of June, and then again at the end of July. Let's go to the next slide. I will focus to power prices. This chart is showing the on-peak bilateral power prices at 4 different hubs. Prices have been fairly consistent and stable throughout the summer so far this year, as opposed to gas prices, which 2025 on average were higher than 2024. In this case, for on-peak power prices, they were actually on average lower than in 2024. I think the highest price we reached was about $51, and that was in the end of August, coinciding with the peak load. Let's go to the next slide. This chart is showing the on-peak power price futures for delivery in July, August, and September 2025 for the same 4 hubs. Similar behavior as for the gas futures, where a spike was observed right around March 10th, and since then we've seen those futures drop off significantly. Let's go to the next slide. So that was gas and power prices. Let's talk about the total market costs. Here, this is showing the daily market costs since 2024. The blue is the total cost, and the red dotted line is the average cost. The things to point out here are that we saw the highest cost reached right around August 21st, which coincided with the peak load, but it was still slightly lower than the highest peak for the year, which was reached on January 21st. Let's go to the next slide. Zooming out a bit at the monthly level, we're seeing that in 2025, the market costs, the total market costs in June and August were comparative in 2025 to 2024, but for July, the 2025 costs were lower than in 2024. Let's go to the next slide. So this zooms out even further to the quarterly level. We're seeing that so far in 2025, market costs have been relatively stable, correlating with the stability in gas and power prices. For Q2 2025, slightly higher total cost than in 2024. And then for Q3 2025, just to note, that is only including 2 months so far, still not including the data for 1 more month. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We shift gears a little bit now and talk about the real-time congestion offset and real-time imbalance energy offset in the ISO and EIM areas. This slide is for the ISO area. What we're seeing is that the real-time congestion offset, the dark blue bars, have increased so far this year, especially since spring, around February. The highest RTCO was reached in August 2025. RT-IEO, imbalance energy offset for ISO area, has been relatively small, especially compared to the previous years. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is for the EIM areas now. This chart is showing the real-time congestion offset by region. In 2025, we see that the real-time congestion offset was stable and low compared to previous years, and the majority of that real-time congestion offset was allocated to Pacific Northwest region. Let's go to the next slide. I think this is the final slide. This is real-time imbalance energy offset for EIM areas. The values have been fairly low, going all the way back into 2024. Similar trend with the similarly grouped by region. We're seeing in the downward direction, Pacific Northwest is allocated most of the real-time imbalance energy offset, and in the upward direction, that seems to be split between Central Mountain and Southwest region. I think that's my final slide. Brenda, let's see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Mahir. Let's see. I don't see any questions at this time. Did you hear me, you guys? I just said there's no more questions in the queue.
Go to the next slide.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Brenda. I think we're good to go to the next section. Yep, so hello, everybody. I'm also in the room. My name is Kyle Pelham. I'm with Market Analysis, and today we're going to be going over a high-level overview of congestion and CRR performance, focusing on the summer months of this year. So, yeah, short summary, kind of a spoiler for the following slides, but just really big picture takeaway is that congestion in 2025 is in line with previous years, particularly focusing on the summer. And then overall, we're still seeing peak congestion rent being collected during solar hours. And for this summer in particular, CRR revenue inadequacy has been lower than what we saw last year. So moving on to the next slide. Yep, so first up, we have total monthly congestion rents broken down by constraint type. Focusing in on 2025, congestion rent totals have been stable for the year, and going to the summer has been, no exception. Overall, summer months, we totaled 139.7 million, averaging 47 million per month, and that 47 million being in line with the 2025 average of, 49 million per month. So, we're keeping stable in 2025 so far. Next slide, please. Again, we have congestion rent totals, but this time totaled by hour. What we've been seeing consistently in the past and so far is holding true now is that, majority of the a majority of the congestion rents are collected during solar hours with a taper downwards in the evening. And of course, 2024, we had a little bit of an exception when it comes to interties, but 2025 is following this trend so far through August of this year. So next slide, please. Now looking at monthly CRR performance, going back to 2023, overall adjusted CRR payment to stakeholders for the summer totaled to $116.2 million with a net deficit of 51.7. Overall, in magnitude, this summer is in between 2023 and 2024. And one particular note, just to bring to the top of the list, is that for revenue adequacy percentage, this summer is up 20 points over last summer. So much more in line with what we saw in 2023. Next slide, please. So with the improved revenue adequacy and overall pro rata funding has enabled the surplus to go towards load. So what we have here is data going back to 2021, where the green is counterfactual with no pro rata funding implemented, and then blue being, what we have going on now with pro rata funding, and we can see consistently across the board, it has led to surplus going back to measured demand. So yeah, this is the end of this section. So if there's any questions on the high-level CRR congestion performance, we'll go to the next section.
Thank you, Kyle. Let me double check if there's any questions in the queue. I don't see any in the verbal raise hand, but those folks who want to ask a question, just click on the middle raise hand icon. Also, we can also review any comments submitted or concerns in the chat as well. But at this time, there's no more questions.
Cool. So next we have a short section on public reports and public reports on market performance. So the next slide, please. We have a lengthy list here, so I'll just go through this quickly, but starting from top to bottom, we have the monthly market performance report. And by the way, these links are active, so if anybody wants to go ahead and click through, on their own time, these should bring you to where you need to go. So starting off at the top, we have the monthly market performance report. This is just a monthly summary of market performance across the day-ahead real-time in the CAISO, and then we also have some additional metrics for the WEIM, prices, congestion, CRR performance, ancillary services, market costs, market disruptions, and then anything else you could probably think of is in there at the monthly level. But yeah, go ahead and take a look. And then next up, we have the MTPF. This is what we're doing now. It's done on a quarterly basis, so feel free to go back and look at previous years, previous quarters. We have the exceptional dispatch reporting tools that are built into OASIS. So following the links there, you can also follow the basic flow of tabs that's outlined to get what you need. Next, we have the daily energy storage report. So this is just a daily system level overview of storage and hybrid resources in the ISO. We have the daily renewable report. Again, that's a system level overview of renewable awards across CAISO, WEIM, with an additional tab for curtailment details. Next, we have the monthly renewable performance report. Again, similar to the daily, but at the monthly level. Some additional stuff in there being net load prices, schedules, curtailment, reliability metrics. We have the day-ahead summer report, which is more focused on the day-ahead load forecast and RUC behavior. Next up, we have the daily market watch for day-ahead market. This is kind of a daily overview of day-ahead market results and CRR results for that day. Similarly, for RTM, it's an overview of CAISO, WEIM market outcomes for that day, but real time. We also have the biweekly performance report, which gives a list of market highlights for that 2-week period with some additional details on congestion rents and ancillary services. And then lastly, for GHG, we have the GHG tracking report, which is focused on CAISO dispatch resources. And then we have the average emissions report, which is hourly megawatt hour and emissions data for the WEIM. Yeah, that's all I have for this section. Any questions, please let us know, but yeah, that's all I have. Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you, Kyle. Just wanted to quickly add, when I created this table, we wanted to display the data reported and related publications that we have on the KAISO website. Also, as a transparency effort with the market operations, market advance team, we do provide those links on Blue. This is the only place you'll be able to review this actual date table. And we did announce this on last notice last week, just stating that we're kind of having this report listed out for folks to kind of see any data that's relevant. And also the publication available is just the time frame of those dates that are available for those specific reports. So you'll see, for example, Exceptional Dispatch, it'll have a rolling of 39 months at this time. So you can go back from now to 39 months. And then the other ones also have like up to the certain date to the present. So I just want to give that a little bit of information on that. And I don't know if there's any other, I know Guillermo might add a few words also for this specific report that we're providing here today.
Thank you, Brenda. Yeah, I think it's mostly a reference for participants. From different discussions and different inquiries we have received over time, we have come to the realization that some participants may not even be aware that certain reports are available and publicly available. We want to ensure that we level the field and everybody understand that there is material out there that they can rely on to understand the performance of the market. And a few months ago, we filed at FERC the decommission of several reports that we have been filing at FERC since day one of the MRTU, going back all the way to 2009. Over the years, we have improved the reporting of the many metrics of the market, and we believe we are at a place where we have the means, the vehicles to provide all the information that participants need for critical areas of the market. And we are always open to any feedback for additional metrics that participants believe could be critical for closing the bridge between what's happening in the market and the timely communication of that information to the public. So with this, we are moving to the next topic. I will pass it to the forecasting team to take on this item.
All right. Thanks, Guillermo. This is Tobias Steckel. I'm a forecast model analyst in the short-term forecasting team. With that, let's go to this first slide. So going to discuss a market issue. So what was identified is that the FRP requirements were calculated using an erroneous sampling period, particularly from the period of August 14th, 2024 to March 12th of 2025. Effectively, this meant the calculation was done with 90 rolling days instead of the communicated and anticipated 180 days, in which we have 90 days rolling and then 90 days that are seasonally forward, but from a year prior. So the impact of this, what we want to convey, you can see on the right, effectively the red dots would be this counterfactual in which we went back and ran the calculations over this time period with the intended sampling size and amount of sample days. And then the blue dot is what was actually, brought downstream and used in the market. So you can see for the most part, we're looking at the average requirement. This is averaged over all hours, and we listed out all of the individual BAAs. So for the most part, there is little deviation between these two different calculations. The majority of cases, it was the case that what was actually generated in the market was a lower overall requirement. It's not the case for every single BAA here, and you can kind of look and go through this plot, but that was the major takeaway here, and the most deviation we saw was around 6 to 8% The other thing that I want to point out about this particular stretch of time is that we compared it to the year prior, this same chunk of time, and effectively this dropped the EIM area coverage rate that we typically report on and will report on in this MPPF, but it dropped the EIM area coverage to 91.5% if you're comparing it to the year prior, which was 93%. So I'll pause there as we just had the one slide on this issue. Let's see if there's any comments.
Thank you, Tobias. I'm looking and don't see any comments, but if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Thank you. But no questions. Thank you.
All right. With that, and then with that, we'll move on to this separate item. So as Guillermo discussed at the top of this section, this presentation, that we were going to add some additional content to the stakeholder effort we had in February of this year and then November in the prior year, in which we went through and simulated essentially what the imbalance reserve requirements would look like, and then looked at different parameter configurations specifically for the Mosaic calculation. So with that, what we wanted to do, we can go to the next slide, is we wanted to break out the granularity specifically for CAISO, just because a broader set of stakeholders are concerned about, you know, what CAISO's requirement may be. So we just wanted to share. This is, we have a bit more content posted on the stakeholder page, which you can see on the bottom right hand. But essentially what we're showing here, just for the sake of this presentation, is that we wanted to break out what the unadjusted requirement would be, meaning that we didn't simulate any sort of diversity benefit. So this is just the raw values of the imbalance reserve requirement. And what we're showing here is the breakout of box and whisker breakout for all hours over this 2-year simulation period. So what I mean by that is we went back and used historical data from 2022 to 2024, and that is what we're presenting here. So you can see the general shape of the upward requirement and the downward requirement, and then get a sense of the spread throughout the year. So we further break that down into seasonal components as well on that webpage. So that is all I had there. I think I saw something in the chat. Oh,
that,
not a question.
that was me. Sorry, I just provided that link. If those folks want to go ahead and follow us on the link that you provided below, they can open it right away. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So that's all I had. Was there any questions on this particular content?
Yes, we do have one question. Let's go ahead and unmute Alva, and please be sure to introduce yourself. Thank you. Just a little. Try again, Alva.
You can sort of hear me, but not very much.
Now we can. You're
Okay,
good.
This is really interesting. Looks like there's a very significant sort of average procurement of, or potentially procurement of these services. And I know some others have raised the issue of the volume here and what the prices might look like. One thing I was curious about is, did you, in looking at this, determine whether in general these requirements were being met by what was being what you assume, well, I'm not sure about the entire construction of this, but what you assumed would be made available in the market currently under a system where there's no actual payment for meeting that requirement. In other words, is this pushing the amount of available flexibility in real time up, or is it simply paying for something that's already there, in your opinion?
I can take on that, Alba. I wish I could have a crystal ball to provide a very specific answer to that, because part of this is a new construct, right? We really don't have very good reference of how participants are going to be bidding, how much capacity is going to be made available for imbalance reserves, and so on. So in order to give you an answer, we need to have some foundational understanding of how that key components of the inputs are going to be coming in. The requirements is one component, that is the demand side, right? But we don't have much certainty how the supply side is going to be looking like. So that is something that we are going to be learning more as we progress deeper into the market simulation and parallel operations, just to get a better appreciation of the balancing between what is required versus what is available to supply. Another factor that I want to point out here is that the requirement is the value estimated for the uncertainty of the net load error between day ahead and real time. We have a similar reference for the real time, obviously, when we are moving from the 15-minute market to the 5-minute market and within the 5-minute market. Naturally, you are going to see that the magnitude of that uncertainty between day ahead and real time is going to be larger than the typical historical uncertainty that we are able to measure and know from history for the 15-minute market. The last component I want to highlight is that all this is also subject to some dynamics of economics that is going to happen in the integrated forward market. It is here where we are going to be procuring economically the imbalance reserves. And that is, we have a construct that is based on price responsiveness. It's not going to be a hard constraint that we always have to meet this level of the requirements, because it's going to be predicated on the prices. And we do have a cap and a limit of how high the prices can be. In this case, the famous or infamous $55 that is subject to some further assessment of how that is going to be working. That price, or not the price per se, but the construct of having a demand curve to procure FRP, somehow is going to tune eventually what level we procure for imbalance reserves. That could be at max, the full requirements, but most likely going to be something lower based on the economics. So all this is really playing a role in determining what the final answer is going to be of what level we are procuring in the integrated forward market. As we progress more in the assessment of the configurable parameters, including the $55, and we get better quality of the data, including potentially how participants are going to be bidding for this product, I think we're going to be in a better place to provide some type of answer on more fundamentals of the input that we get.
That makes sense. I mean, there are two things. One is the RSE test will require that enough IR be available, even if you don't decide to buy it all. So one question would be, is there going to be enough available, of course? And that's another thing, obviously, you'll be assessing. But I think one would look at that in terms of historically what has been available in the real-time market. And, you know, is it, in general, you know, if you, it doesn't necessarily mean if you've seen historically that there's less being bid into real time than what you're planning to procure, that doesn't mean it's not there, but it would certainly be an indication that we should expect to see some real prices on the product. Whereas if you are always seeing, you know, 4,000 megawatts up and down in the peak hours, which might be the case. I don't really know what the kind of average I haven't looked myself at what the average amount going into the real-time market is, but if it's, obviously, if it's significantly less than what you're planning on procuring, then that would indicate that there's going to be some, potentially high prices for these products. So I think historic evidence about what's been in the real-time market could also help here for us to understand, how significant these products are going to be. Thank you very much, Guillermo. I appreciate your going through the different elements there.
Thank you, Alba. And yeah, this is an area of interest for sure between now and prior to go live, that we have made the commitment that we're going to be closely assessing to try to minimize surprises by the go live. Brenda, I don't see any other questions yet on the. Oh, there is one on the chat.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think Dan was just adding on to the conversation about it being configurable parameters working group. So.
Yes. So we have, I don't know if it's already public, but we have our next scheduled meeting for the configurable parameters to take place on October 21st. I think that was a publicly available schedule that maybe was presented in the kickoff session of August 20-something. But to answer the question, yes, the next one is October 21st. Is there any other question, Brenda?
Yeah, Brian, let's go ahead to Brian. Unmute Brian, thank you. And Dan says thank you as well.
With Middle River Power. Forgive me for not remembering or not hearing, but would you remind me from these Box and Worcester plots, what will the ISO's procurement target be to the relative to the quantities displayed on those plots?
I think, Guillermo, I don't know if this is one of the configurable parameters. Are you asking about the amount of procurement of of any of these particular requirements for a given hour?
I'm just trying to understand from this information presented, which is really interesting. What should a market participant assume? How will these inform what the ISO's ultimate IR procurement targets will be?
Okay. Let me try to unpack the question first, Brian, to make sure that we understand what the question is. When you refer to procurement targets, to me, that is equivalent to the requirement. And
yes,
what you have here slide from Tobaya is the requirement. So I don't know, you want to explain, Tobaya, the construct of the box plot just to give him some reference of potentially what levels we are thinking to put as requirements, and then I can elaborate on the procurement.
Yeah, so let's just take one hour. If I'm looking at the upward requirement and looking at hour ending 9, so a median requirement here would be about 3,200 megawatts. And maybe the other thing that's relevant here is this is being conveyed without any diversity benefit, which would be taken off of that original amount of 3,200. So that would be like kind of the construction here. We're just using one example target.
Okay.
Let me.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Let me complement that, Brian, to see if we fully answered your question. So this is only giving you a sampling of the assessed requirements based on historical information, right? If we were living in the past and we were estimating the imbalance reserve requirement, this is how it would look like for the past. Naturally, we are in a slightly different place in the future when we have more integration of renewable resources and some other dynamics, so take that with a grain of salt. Now, based on just this historical information, As Tobias was indicating, this gives you some simple statistics. Basically, this is percentiles. If you take the horizontal line that is within each bar, that is kind of the 50 percentile. So a half of the time, you're going to have a requirement that is somewhere below the, I would say, 3,000 megawatts for hour ending 9. A half of the time, somebody's going to be higher than that. So it just tells you the percentiles of the sampling. Just to give you some ballpark reference in what range of the requirements you're going to be. Worst case, the maximum value you're going to have is the end of the whisker. That could be maybe around 4,200 for hour ending 9. The lowest value you could ever see for that hour in history would be around maybe 700 megawatts. It's just giving you that reference of historical distribution percentile. Now, let me elaborate further. As I indicated to Alba, these are simply the face value requirements. Then they are adjusted down for diversity benefit. That is what the market is going to be actually trying to procure. Maybe it's going to be the 90% of the requirement, 90 plus or so, depending on the diversity. So it's going to be something lower. But then we are going to procure that economically based on a demand curve. And based on the economics of the $55 and below, we may clear that full requirement or maybe very well clearing something much lower. That is something we cannot answer right now because we don't have very good information of the economics of the abundant reserve supply that is going to be available to gain some insights of in what range we're going to be. As I indicated to Alba, as we start getting deeper into market simulation and parallel operations, we are going to gain more certainty where the market is trending with those requirements.
Thank you both for your answer, which was much more precise than my question. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Guillermo, I don't see any other questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you. I think there is one more topic that we have before we complete the section of the update.
Right, I will be taking this section. Hello all, I'm Leisha Matsunobu with the short-term forecasting team. And we can go to the next slide. So the high-level summary here is short-term forecasting STF has added additional metrics for tracking and to provide context around forecast performance over time. We've typically included a whole sort of deck in MPPF on forecasting metrics, and we're expanding that. But all these metrics are basically going to be reported in the appendices, but we're giving an update here on what updates and changes we've made. Right, so MPPF stakeholders can refer to MPPF slides for quick snapshots of forecast performance. And we are continuing to develop tools for monitoring and analysis. If there are any comments or questions beyond this presentation, please reach out to STF through Citi. Okay, I'll cover the bullet points on the right first. So starting in this Q3 2025 MPPF, we have expanded the metrics in load, renewable, and uncertainty forecasting. The metrics will be included in the appendices of MPPF, so way at the end of this deck. And then for forecasting sections, if there are specific trends we want to highlight, we'll pull visuals out of there or add additional visuals to present in MPPF as needed. Demand and uncertainty metrics, because there are kind of the most changes in there. We've added some additional, more detailed technical slides on exactly the changes and calculations made, and those additional reference slides are in this MPPF's appendix. So the table on the left, the table on the left summarizes our changes compared to previous MPPFs. So we're basically adding and not taking away any information. In load, we have a top 10 days plot, which I will be highlighting in a couple slides here. And then when we report on day ahead load metrics, there's some additional context with the megawatt error and then adding minimum and maximum load statistics. I think for EIM, also important to highlight that, so beyond T60 MAPE, we're also going to be reporting T60 mean absolute error, and then those will also have the additional context of minimum and maximum load. For renewables, there's one additional plot to show capacity growth by resource type. The renewables plots are for the CAISO BIA only, since that's what we forecast for. And since our MAPE metrics use capacity as the denominator, it's megawatt hour divided by capacity, the plot of capacity growth is pretty important to that metric, so we've added that in here. And then uncertainty, the main changes is that we're moving from a monthly metric reporting to quarterly. I'll kind of explain in detail why that happened, and then also increasing the geographic granularity of the metric. So instead of reporting only EIM area in CAISO, we'll be reporting EIM area and then all of these statistics by BAA, by EIM. All right, we can go to the next slide. So the motivations for these changes, I'll go through load first. The load patterns are changing. A lot of this due to DER growth, but the changes in those patterns really impact error metrics. I think what we're finding is you start to see these trends emerge of like this example in the bottom of your midday load really lowering, and as we continue to define forecast accuracy metrics as MAPE, or your megawatt error divided by the observed actual, the smaller that observed actual gets, the larger it just exaggerates MAPE essentially. So even at the same levels of megawatt error, you can see like a 50% MAPE or something like that if your midday load is very, very low. So in evaluating MAPE, we want to provide the context of what is happening to minimum loads that tend to really drive up MAPE. And then in addition, if you're seeing higher peak loads over time, the potential ceiling for your megawatt error is increasing. So mean absolute error can increase over time with increasing peak loads. So we're including that maximum peak load as context to interpreting MAE trends. For uncertainty, uncertainty trends will vary by BAA. So first, reporting by BAA is a nice, more detailed metric to track. And then uncertainty observations can be pretty sensitive in shorter time frames. So to try to avoid or try to prevent that sort of noise from maybe a hotter August this year compared to last year, we're tracking those trends here in a quarterly format. So it should be less sensitive to the noise of just the weather patterns, and you can kind of see the trends of FRP performance at the quarterly time level. And then for uncertainty broadly, the aim is to minimize requirements and exceedance without compromising coverage. So coverage has a target that you want to hit, and then beyond that, you want the most efficient model possible. So you want to see coverage remain at target, and then requirements and exceedance decrease with time. However, requirements and exceedance are expected to increase in megawatt value as load and renewable uncertainty grows. So there's kind of multiple trends there, but that's sort of the expectation. We can go to the next slide. Okay, and then this is a brief selection of the plots that are in the appendices. So I'll just talk through a little bit to explain high level how to interpret. So for the load plot at the upper left, which is just showing 3 months here, but the ones in the appendix have the full year. But for the top left, we're looking at CAISO day-ahead MAPE. The bars correspond to the MAPE metric, and the points correspond to the minimum load on the secondary y-axis. So not only are you comparing your day-ahead forecast accuracy by month through a 3-year horizon, you're also getting to see what the trend is with your minimum loads. So for January, for CAISO, we see that MAPE has been decreasing, and then minimum load has had a decreasing trend as well. That's a pretty nice result because it's showing that even though our minimum loads are decreasing, and that in itself we should expect MAPEs to maybe increase through the years, our MAPEs continue to decrease, which is very good performance considering the trend of minimum load. For on the right here, now going through this EIM area plot, this is the snapshot of FRP performance at the EIM area level, and you're getting 3 different metrics, so coverage, requirement, and exceedance. We're really highlighting the overall coverage, so both directions, where the target is 95% coverage, and then that's broken down into direction in the bottom left, first column, FRU coverage and FRD coverage, and then we detail FRU requirement, FRD requirement, FRU exceedance, FRD exceedance. So you can see these specific metrics by direction, but overall coverage is sort of the first primary goal, and then minimizing requirements and exceedance over time is the next goal. Coverage plots show our target coverage lines. So at an overall level, we're targeting 95% coverage, and then once you go to directional coverage, you want to cover at a at basically the 97.5th percentile line. So that's why the coverage target line in the FRU and FRD plots is a little higher. So these plots are provided per BAA in the appendix. And I'll also just make one more note that the quarters don't always line up with when we're preparing those materials and presenting an MPPF. So usually the most current quarter will have partial data for that quarter, and then we'll just update it in the next presentation. So Q3 in here for 2025 is current till September 2nd, which will be noted in the plot. Okay, and I will pause there because the next couple slides go into a slightly different topic. So we'll see if we have any questions.
There's no questions, Leisha. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so moving on into forecast performance from summer. So June through August 2025 was generally below normal for CAISO BAA. If we split up that trend by direction, we saw that highs were about 1.5 degrees below normal. Lows were actually about a degree above normal. Looking at the WIM, Pac Northwest had the most extreme and widespread departures from normal. And then the Desert Southwest entities in the WIM tended to have below normal temps in June, July, and above normal in August. Touching on precip, in the drought monitor on the bottom right here, we are seeing that the total area in drought is about the same this year compared to this time last year, but severity has increased across. There's an average about 36% increase in severe or higher drought. So severity's increased, total area in drought's about the same. And then we'll go to the next slide. Here is our top 10 plot so far in 2025. This is looking at T60 accuracy, so basically our real-time forecasts. We take the top 10 load days from the year so far, and then take the average accuracy in that sample so we can see how forecast accuracy did during peak load times. In the majority of regions, 2025 has been trending pretty well. We noted a couple, PACE, PNM, and WALC, that are seeing higher average error in 2025, driven by a few sample days here. PNM and WALC especially have had generally higher MAPE than previous years, so we're reviewing that and continuing to work with them to ensure data integrity for forecasting. Okay, let's go to the next slide, which might be the last one for this section. Right, okay, so we wanted to just give a quick summary because there's a lot of plots in the appendices that we provided, but just some quick trends and highlights. CAISO day-ahead forecast error in summer 2025 has been low, partially driven by relatively cool temps and low loads. Our FRP coverage among all BAs is pretty near target. Some areas for additional monitoring. PNM forecast accuracy in spring summer 2025 has generally been higher than previous years, so that is something we're reviewing and going to reach out about. And then FRP requirement growth. There's been requirement growth in a handful of regions that we will note, so that is also something we're reviewing and monitoring right now. So that is it for this section. I will pause to see if there's any questions.
Thank you. Leisha, I don't see any questions in the queue at this time, but great job. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
So we're doing a quick time check. Go ahead, Guillermo.
Well, I wanted to check with you, Brenda, because with this we are done with the market performance update, so we know we have 2 more sections for policy and projects, so I don't know how you want to organize the next one.
Okay, let me check with my policy team. We do have about 20 minutes left before noon. I just see Alyssa. Let's go ahead and get started. I'll kick it off. Thank you, Guillermo.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brenda. I'm Alyssa Craig-Arnold with the Market Strategy and Governance team, and I'm here with the policy staff from Market Policy Development to provide an update on the current policy initiatives. We're going to start with 4 initiatives that are being presented at the governance meetings later this month, either for a decision or as an informational item. And then we'll move on to a brief status update on the remaining initiatives as well as a policy roadmap. So I'll start with Sylvie Spivak with the Gas Resource Management Initiative. Sylvie, go ahead.
There we go. Thanks, Alyssa. For gas resource management, we published the draft final proposal on September 17th, just a couple of weeks ago. The draft final proposal identified enhancements in 3 areas. First was changes to the multi-day advisory market runs that from which we will be providing information to improve fuel procurement. These changes include enhancements to improve the accuracy of the D+2, as well as a proposal to provide more information from the D3 and the D4 to support fuel procurement for weekends and holidays. The draft final proposal offers 3 changes to accommodate fuel cost volatility. One is a fuel cost parameter adjustment that market participants can request, and that would apply to all reference levels. Another change will be the ISO will increase the reasonableness threshold to account for unexpected commitments, and an after-the-fact cost recovery rule for physical supply disruptions. On September 19th, we had a market surveillance committee discussion where Scott Harvey led a discussion around gas burn forecasting and commitment cost mitigation, and we should expect their decision in the coming weeks. This will go to the board at the end of October under the primary authority of the WEM governing body.
Thanks, Sylvia. I think we can move on to the next slide, the greenhouse gas coordination with Anya.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm here to provide an update on where we are with the Greenhouse Gas Coordination Working Group. And our main deliverable is the accounting and reporting approach. We are looking to publish this final proposal either later this week or early next week. And really what this approach does is produce an out-of-market, after-the-fact report that helps facilitate accounting for either state or corporate greenhouse gas emission policies that do not have a price of carbon associated with them. To do this, it produces a data set that allows entities to see and understand the emissions intensity of either transfers or their portfolio. And we've been working closely with both a subgroup of volunteers from the working group as well as the Greenhouse Gas Working Group to develop the report format. This is a non-decisional item going to the October Joint Board of Governors and WEM governing body general session meeting. So I wanted to provide a little bit of background on what you'll see later this month at the board meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Anya. And I think we can move on to RA updates with Partha and Hillary.
Sure, thank you, Alyssa. Really appreciate it. First, in terms of sort of the overall scope of the CAISO RA reforms, we're looking to advance. We had extensive feedback from stakeholders via our working group process, as well as during our various tracks that we had spun out from those working groups, looking to identify needed reforms to our current RA processes. Two of the reforms we're looking to go to our board are, especially with our track 1, where we're looking to update our CAISO default rules for RA, as well as track 3, providing us with additional visibility into into capacity resources that are not shown as RA into the CAISO. So I'm going to defer to Hillary on track 3, but I thought for basically a brief update for people who aren't following our initiative. Loose as a way of background our default rules. CAISO has default rules which are really used for LRAs as a fallback when they have not specified their own counting or PRMs within their tariff. One of the issues that's identified as a challenge by stakeholders was that our default rules hadn't been updated in nearly 20 years, and likely that the PRM set as well as the counting rules, they wouldn't result in a portfolio that would meet our reliability needs, and they didn't, and the default counting rules didn't reflect the relative contribution to reliability of different resources and resource types. If you're willing to go to the next slide. One more slide, please. Oh, thank you. So as a part of our final proposals, we've taken a lot of feedback from stakeholders in terms of what they'd like our updated rules to address. We have basically a hybrid methodology we're looking to advance to the board, where certain resource types, wind, solar, storage, hydro, we're looking to apply an average ELCC method to. Other resources such as thermal, nuclear, and pump storage, we're having a UCAP proposal that we've developed, and and as well as a performance-based counting mechanism from DR. I think the real kind of takeaway is that we're wanting to make sure that these resources sort of fit together to meet a 0.1 LOLE and reflect the relative contribution to our resource types. We also recognize, and I think this is one of the key things that stakeholders want to address, was that we'll likely need to review this, both from a methodology as well as from the results, and that trying to make sure that these are effective information, particularly because some LRAs have indicated that they look to our default rules and setting their own targets within their program design. So we're looking to really kind of finalize what that process looks like for updating it and give assurance, particularly for those other LRAs, as well as for, I think there was stakeholder feedback on looking for consistency with the PUC program. So we're going to be providing some of that guidance in terms of how we're looking to both update these rules as well as address on an ongoing basis, given the evolving nature of the LRA program. So I'll stop there, and maybe I'll turn to Hillary for track 3.
Thank you, Partha. Next slide, please. The second item that we anticipate going to the board in October is in track 3A, and this track is associated with increasing the ISO's visibility into the status of the RA-eligible fleet. This is the beginning of a larger effort around reviewing and updating the ISO's backstop procurement processes. So that will begin, the broader piece of that will begin later this year. And some of those issues have previously been discussed in the RA working group. But for this subtrack and item that will be going to the board in October, the focus is on collecting new information that will allow the ISO to more efficiently locate capacity when backstop procurement is needed, and therefore more efficiently implement and execute existing backstop procurement processes in advance of the structural review that will begin later this year. So the proposal here, which was most recently discussed in the draft final proposal at the meeting on August 28th, and which will also be reflected in the forthcoming final proposal, is a new set of reporting requirements for scheduling coordinators of RA-eligible capacity that is not shown to the ISO as RA in a given month or year. So these reporting requirements will follow the same timeline as the supply plans that are already completed for RA showings. So it'll be on the same year ahead and month ahead schedules. They will apply to resources that appear on the ISO's net qualifying capacity list and are located inside the California ISO balancing authority area. So for example, resources such as energy only or pre-COD or credited resources that are credited by local regulatory authorities but not on the NQC list will not be covered by these reporting requirements. The reporting will be information only, so this will not impose any new availability requirements on the capacity that is being reported on. This is purely to help the ISO better understand the status of resources that are RA eligible but not being shown as RA. And as discussed, this will also allow the ISO to more efficiently conduct existing backstop processes. The other piece of the draft final proposal is the retirement of the monthly non-RA capacity report on the grounds that we haven't seen that it is being used and providing value. That concludes 3A.
Thanks, Hillary. I think you're up again on the next slide with CRRs.
Moving on to congestion revenue rights enhancements. We have recently reached in this initiative the end of the scoping phase focused on goals and problem statements. Excuse me. So most recently, we had a final working group meeting on September 8th. That was the culmination of discussions that we've had over the past 9 months, starting in November of last year. So we've had the opportunity to hear from a number of stakeholders presenting their perspectives on the current CRR market structure. We've heard some analysis on CRR market outcomes since the last round of policy updates, as well as some perspectives from other ISOs on how they structure their similar equivalent markets. So all of this has built up into a conversation over a series of 2 meetings, one in May and one recently in September, to talk about how that should all be distilled into goals and problem statements that can guide the policy development phase of this initiative, which will start later this year. So forthcoming in this initiative then will be an updated discussion paper that will summarize all of the feedback that we've heard so far and provide the final goals and problem statements. And then after that, we will move into policy development. We are also in this area paying attention to the conversations that are being had in the EDM implementation space about modeling and implementation and settlement that will have an impact on the CRR market structure. So while those are not part of the initiative per se, we're aware that there's some crossover and are also coordinating with that process. So forthcoming, the next item here will be the updated discussion paper, and we will move then this fall into policy development.
Thanks, Hillary. We've got one more RA update from Partha on track 2.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Alyssa. So yeah, again, this is really just an update just in terms of where we're at in terms of the progress we're making with stakeholders on developing our track 2 proposal, particularly around added and substitution. Just so as background, really our added substitution process, as I mentioned before, we had lengthy working group processes where we were scoping items. Added substitution was really one of the issues that got the most unanimous support, really in terms of looking for the ISO to, remove friction that's created from the bilateral processes to obtain substitute capacity, as well as address some of the issues that are resulting in RA capacity being held back inefficiently, which is resulting in artificial tightness in the bilateral market and potential maintenance delays, which could ultimately result in higher forced outage rates. I'm going to go to the next slide. So in terms of where we're at in the process, we had issued our straw proposal where we had developed multiple options for ways to improve our processes. And largely this is really driven around different types of pool structures to allow for participants to, scheduling coordinators are looking to take planned outages to more efficiently obtain substitute capacity. Our recommended approach was really what we describe as a enhanced matching function where SCs would have increased visibility to what offers would look like from buyers to sell substitute capacity in the market. We also developed a couple of alternatives, including an optimization based on price and megawatts, where the ISO could procure on behalf of SCs and allocate the cost to SCs. We had a lot of feedback on these from different parties. We're right now in the process of looking at that feedback on how we're going to evolve our design based on the feedback of participants. But maybe I'll stop there to see if there's any questions. But yeah, I really appreciate everyone's involvement. I know there's been a lot of good proposals from participants as well, which we are reading through right now to figure out how we can incorporate some of those ideas going forward. So I'll pause there to see if there's any questions.
There's no questions at this time.
Great. Sounds like we can move on to the remaining policy initiative updates. I'll start with demand and distributed energy market integration, DDEMI. The DDEMI working group has been working on the development and enhancement of participation models and market rules around demand response and distributed energy resource participation, and has just finalized a set of problem statements, which are listed below here. The final working group meeting is going to be focused on scoping, and that'll be taking place later this month. And then after the final working group meeting, work is going to transition to the policy development phase, and the goal is to move towards implementation in 2026 or 2027. Next slide, please. EDAM congestion revenue allocation. So the first phase of this initiative was an expedited effort that resulted in a transitional design that was approved by the Board of Governors and the WEM governing body back in June. Tariff revisions to support the proposal were approved in late August. And then the ISO will be picking up the second phase of EDAM CRA working towards more of a long-term solution and looking at evolving the design, and that will be starting in Q4 of this year. And then I also want to flag that ISO staff will be presenting on the analysis plan at the Joint General Session Governance meeting on the 29th of this month. So we just encourage anyone with questions about next steps on the analysis to attend that presentation. And then next up, I've got James talking about price formation enhancements.
Thank you, Alyssa. On August 22nd of this year, the CAISO published the BAA level market power mitigation and scarcity pricing straw proposal that was the culmination of work done in many months of working group sessions with stakeholders. We had meetings on those proposals in early September on 2 different days, whose recordings and presentation materials are up on our website. Stakeholders submitted formal comments that were due on September 19th, and the CAISO staff is reviewing those as we speak. The proposal modifies the BAA level market power mitigation process that is currently done in the Western EIM and proposed to be done in the upcoming EDAM, and also expands some concepts of emergency pricing to strengthen reliability signals as it relates to scarcity pricing. So this proposal sort of re-engages stakeholders on these important topics following a hold in the price formation activities needed to accommodate work on other urgent stakeholder and policy priorities. And as of today, the proposed decisional classification for the policies within this proposal are under the primary authority of the WE, Western Energy Markets Governing Body, with some stakeholders suggesting that there may be specific elements of the proposal that might be more appropriate for primary authority of the CAISO Board of Governors, and the CAISO staff is looking into those suggestions. Thanks, Alyssa.
Thanks, James. I also just want to flag that policy staff are planning to give a PFE briefing at the October 28 governing body meeting. So if you have any other questions or looking for more specifics, that would be a great venue for that. Next up, we've got Sergio with storage design and modeling.
Thank you, Alyssa, and good morning, well, now afternoon to everyone. In storage design and modeling, we've been working on 4 different topic groups enlisted here. Our most recent meeting was held earlier this week, where we discussed mainly topics related to uplift and the default energy bids topic group, state of charge management, and the mixed fuel and distribution level resources topics as well. Following this meeting that we had on the 29th, we're expecting stakeholder comments that will be due on October 13th. We really look forward to the feedback, particularly as we are driving towards a straw proposal on the uplift topic group by the end of this year. At this point, we have 2 more meetings planned out for the beginning of November and December. And yeah, I'd like to take this opportunity to, let stakeholders know that we really appreciate the engagement we've been seeing, and to remind all of you that if you have thoughts, proposals, alternatives, you're welcome to reach out to us, and we'll be able to have some opportunity for presenting that and collaborating with all stakeholders. The proposed decisional classification is really defined by topic group. There are some elements that we're discussing here that are not decisional, but at this point, we're still working through some of the initial steps of the straw proposal with some of those topics. So thank you for the time. Let us know if you have any questions. I'm looking forward for the feedback October 13th.
Thanks, Sergio. Next slide, please. I'll go ahead and close out with an update on the policy catalog and roadmap. A revised 2025 roadmap was published back in June, and that was just a kind of recalibration of the existing roadmap to accommodate the EDAM CRA initiative. We published the 2025 catalog in July, and that was a synthesis of the stakeholder discretionary policy submissions, as well as the stakeholder prioritization feedback. And then next up, we plan to publish the draft roadmap for 2026 to 2028 later this month. That'll include several new initiatives for 2026, as well as an updated work plan for all of the current initiatives. And I do just want to flag here that we have reserved space on the 2026 roadmap for policy changes associated with EDAM implementation, which I know is a common question that we've received. We'll be accepting comments on the draft roadmap after that's released, and then we plan to have a public workshop on that draft roadmap in early November, and then publish a final roadmap in December. And that December roadmap will include a disposition of all the stakeholder submissions that we received that were not added to this year's roadmap. The next couple of slides I've included just kind of as an overview of policy schedules for all of the current initiatives this year, just as a reference, but I'm not going to review those in detail. And that concludes all of my policy updates. I'll open it up to questions for me or the policy staff.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you to all the policy leads that prepared and provided updates. I went ahead and submitted through the chat a few of the web pages that directly takes you to their initiatives that they're leading. This is also a great overview of the proposal development phase that our team is currently working on. But if you have any questions, definitely reach out to us and we'll help everyone out. But thank you, Alyssa. I don't see any questions at this time. All right, let's go ahead and, Tegan, can I go ahead and move the slide? 116. So we are pretty much wrapping up right now. I want to go ahead and move the slide to the next upcoming forum. We have it tentatively scheduled on December 11th, 2025. That will currently will be virtual at this point. But we definitely appreciate everyone's participation in this call. As a reminder, this call was recorded, will be posted within the next few business days as well. And then also, we do have an upcoming event coming on at the California ISO on site for the WEIM Modeling and Resource Registration, as well as the new Resource Implementation Forum on the 7th and 8th. If you wish to participate, feel free to go ahead and register now. If you're planning to come on site, we are still wrapping up registration. If you are still interested, that will be on site from the morning of the 10/7 and 10/8. But at this time, I think we are going to be ending our meeting a little bit early. So if folks that are planning to join in the afternoon, we will no longer be continuing NPPF. So let your colleagues know that we'll be wrapping up this morning. But the next update I have for the Energy Blog Matters, the most recent post we posted was the Control Center Modernization, Enhanced Reliability with John Phelps. And then we do have some upcoming blog, but not the time, but we'll be posting those later this month. But most of them will be shown on the California ISO website. And then if there's any more questions, I did provide lots of the links throughout the meeting. I apologize for that in advance. We do have the most up-to-date Market Performance and Planning Forum slide deck available for everyone to view. We do have those up-to-date with the policy updates and also Guillermo's team. So feel free to check out the appendix. I won't be going through that at this time, but the appendix starts right now at 122. And then feel free to message me at bmarquez@kaiso.com. But thank you all for your participation, and thank you all to my policy leads and all the Guillermo's team for helping us out with this forum. If you have any feedback, send us over to myself at Stakeholder Affairs at kaiso.com, and I'll send it back to Tegan to help us close our call. Thank you so much, everyone.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Inteller Events. You may now disconnect.